but I do want to talk about transgenders, if I may. So here's my quick
Sure.
position on it, right? I think it is, I did a video on this on social media yesterday. I think it's absurd that people believe in this country that if you're born a man, transition to a woman, you should be able to compete against other women on the playing field. I think most people in this country feel that way. And if they don't, I think they're an idiot. I'm going to be very clear on that. It's absurd.
I think that's a very straight, that strikes me as obvious. And it's bizarre that there's a 20% of the public disagrees.
Yeah, and I had Seth Moulton on the show yesterday, and he had made a similar statement that I just made, and Democrats were attacking him. And I'm like, what the hell is going on in this country? So let's start there where we agree. That's absurd, right? Leah Thomas, a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Nancy Mace, here's my issue with some of the Republicans out there, not all, but some.
Yeah.
So Nancy Mace doesn't want a colleague to use the same female restroom as her. Now, my position is I don't care what restroom people use. I don't believe that someone is a transgender because they want, the only reason why they became a transgender is because they want to go into a woman's restroom and physically assault somebody or something. I'm not buying that at all. I don't care, but that's just my personal opinion. Nancy Mace has a different opinion. Fine. In the last 2 days, she's tweeted 200 times about this issue. She's put out videos and she's grandstanding on it. Yet when there's a school where innocent children die, she'll put up one tweet usually that says thoughts and prayers. I have a serious problem with that. Okay, fine. You don't think that trans women should be in the women's restroom. Fine. Put out your tweet, do your video. She's been talking about it all week, Will. And I'm saying to myself, I think there are more important issues than that. And she seems to be obsessed with this issue, for lack of a better term.
Maybe, but I mean, I can understand that people would be focused on issues that they're personally involved in that personally affect them, and this is one. All of a sudden, I mean, Nancy Mace is a sexual assault victim by her own testimony, and has said that she is straight up not comfortable with having biological males in her bathroom. She would like that to not happen. I think that's a perfectly reasonable request. I think that it is. I think that one of the ways in which, especially, I think this is one of those cases where I think the Democrats would do well to listen to feminists who speak on this issue and the ways in which these trans inclusionary policies actually end up invading and really essentially making women uncomfortable in what are supposed to be their private spaces. And I think that, what Nancy Mace's positions under this is perfectly reasonable to me. And it's her piece, it's her idea, it's her piece of legislation. She's taking endless incoming. I mean, the flack that she's taking from, both her and her staffers are taking online. Like we talked about the bomb threats or whatever that you were talking about in Springfield. Well, her staff have gotten galore.
That's horrible. Yeah, I don't condone any of that. That's
terrible. So I don't. But that sort of would justify why is she talking about this so much? Well, I think she struck a nerve. So I don't begrudge her for it, and I think her position is eminently reasonable.
Yeah, I just want transgenders to live their life and be who they are. I want people who are gay to be happy with who they are. I don't have a problem with gay marriage. I don't have a problem with Gay Pride Month. I don't have a problem with drag queens reading books to kids. And when I ask Republicans, many of them who are against drag queen reading, I say, can you name me one example of a child that was killed at a drag queen reading? Can you name me one example of a child that was by a drag queen reading a book? And it seems like there are a lot of MAGA Republicans that are fixated on these issues, but they don't want to talk about the woman's right to choose. They don't want to talk about gun control.
I mean, should we let children read? Like, should children be able to go to the store and buy hardcore?
Right, but I think I'll answer that. But I think that's a different topic than drag queen reading. I've been to some of these drag queen readings because I wanted to learn for myself, and there was no.
I mean, it undermines the sort of point of like, oh well, nobody dies at these drag queen readings. It's like, well, that does not end the debate about.
So there are things that are inappropriate. You're right. Do I think that children, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, should be reading books that have? No. Do I think that's happening a lot in society? No. If it is happening, and if it is happening, yes, those books would be inappropriate for children. But the point I'm trying to make, it seems to me, and you can tell me if you disagree, that there are a lot of MAGA Republicans out there. When I say MAGA Republican, I mean people that are far to the right, just like you would disagree with people that are far to the left, that they seem to want to talk more about these issues than about gun control, or, for example, healthcare. We've heard for 9 years that Donald Trump wants to go away with Obamacare. Yet on a debate stage, he says he has concepts of a plan. Why has he not sat down for a couple hours and come up with a plan with some policymakers? So that's my frustration. They want to talk about drag queen reading, and they want to talk about books, which I don't necessarily agree with, by the way. Why are they not talking more about a replacement plan for healthcare, and why hasn't he come up with a plan?
Well, I mean, I guess we'll take those issues. We'll start with the two issues you highlight, and then go back to the trans one. How about that? That seems like, because it's three.
Yeah.
Gun control. I mean, obviously conservatives have a fundamental disagreement with the left about the proper way to handle that. And there's also, I think, the bigger sort of reason why this debate is actually a little bit less salient is because the Second Amendment in this country, especially as interpreted by the Supreme Court recently, is extraordinarily robust. So I don't think, even if Democrats could put in place whatever policy Democrats could get in place if they had the political power to do so, given the constraints of existing Supreme Court precedent, I just don't think it would have any meaningful difference on school safety. I think that honestly, the only real route to really increasing school safety is actually things like Republican proposals for hardening school security guards at schools, things like that. I don't think there's a world where
Can I ask you about that? Hardening schools. So after the Uvalde, Texas, right, terrible tragedy, we'll both agree on that. Ted Cruz talked about hardening schools, and he said that the door in the back of the school should have been locked. And we heard J.D. Vance on a debate stage talk about windows need to be stronger. Do you really think, Will, that an 18-year-old that just shot his grandmother in the face would see a deterrent in a door being locked or a window? I just don't see that. When you're holding an AR-15 or an assault weapon with thousands of rounds of ammunition, I don't think a locked door. Now, an armed security guard, sure. There are a lot of schools in this country that do have armed security guards. I'm totally fine with that. But I just feel I feel like hardening schools, they're not only talking about armed security guards, but they're talking about locked doors. They're talking about windows being stronger. My personal opinion, Will, I think the age needs to be 18 to 21. I think we need to implement the same assault weapons ban that was implemented and fizzled out in the early 90s. I think there needs to be some mandatory training, because if you or I are in a store and there's an active shooter situation, if you have a gun, I want to make sure that you're at least trained on how to use the gun. Give me a couple hours of that. I just think there are things we can do as a society to make us safer. And I personally, and we'll probably disagree on this, but I personally don't think more guns necessarily make us safer. And I think Uvalde, Texas is a perfect example of that, when you had a bunch of coward police officers that refused to go into the classroom. And because of that, probably more innocent children died. So I think if we did a couple things differently, besides maybe just hardening schools, as you put it, I think there are things we can do. I'm a Second Amendment guy. I think you have the right to own a gun. We should all be allowed to protect ourselves with weapons. I just think there are things we can do moving forward that could make things better.
So this is a good example of what I mean by the Supreme Court kind of getting in the way of this stuff. So I think the assault weapons ban that was formulated in the 90s would not pass constitutional muster anymore. The big problem there is the Heller discussion about the limitation on banning guns that are in common use. The AR-15 is the most common gun in the country. So I don't think any restriction on the AR-15 could be past constitutional muster. It's not a machine gun, right? So like that, I think, so when you're talking about like, why aren't we talking about more about gun control? It's like, I think that maybe this is one of those areas where if you haven't really thought about the fact that an AR-15 ban would not pass constitutional muster, which means that whatever category of gun you're trying to ban, you're not going to get AR-15s. You're going to get machine guns, but those have been banned for decades. So, you're not going to get AR-15s in that gun ban anymore, not through the Supreme Court. So that makes the gun control debate kind of seem, this is what I mean by like, whatever the Democrats could even do if they had the political power to do so would not change the situation on the ground. So I think that's why hardening. And so when you talk about, oh, well, windows and doors, and that probably wouldn't stop that 15-year-old. I think you need to think about these things incrementally, like, the process of the hardening schools as like an overall project. You want to, single point of entry and exit with security guards and more robust defenses elsewhere. That's what you're trying to accomplish. That would help.
I'm okay with that.
Ultimately,
I'm okay with that.
But then to answer the original question is why do we care about why? So that's an answer of why we don't care that much about that issue, or why that's not talked about.
What about the 99% of other gun violence throughout the country? Though obviously we have, sadly, school shootings. But I want to come up with solutions. I don't hear a lot of reasonable solutions from people on the far right. I talk to a lot of reasonable Republicans on a daily basis, and we come up with a lot of things that we agree upon. But I just feel like there's more we could do to make it safer for people in this country.
But I think a big part of why that's such a hard thing to do, like, you talk about the 99% of other gun crime, a huge chunk of that happens in liberal cities run by progressive prosecutors that aren't really enforcing those laws effectively enough. They're not keeping their citizens safe. A lot of those.
In some circumstances, like Chicago, sure, but I think you can also
Chicago,
take,
Philly, Larry
right,
Krasner.
right. But I mean, you're also
LA
talking
until
about,
recently. The Democrats finally got their act together in LA and kicked out their horrible district attorney that they have there. But
I mean, the
before that,
larger, sure, but I mean, the larger populations in the bigger cities, of course, are going to have more crime. There's a gang problem, certainly in Chicago. But I guess from my perspective, I don't care whether it's a Democrat city or a Republican city. I don't care whether it's black, white, you name it, gang violence. Gun violence to me is gun violence. And we have a big problem in this country. And what we're doing right now is not working, right? Republican or Democrat. What we're doing in this country is not working. Some changes need to be made. It doesn't mean that Republicans and Democrats are going to agree on everything, but I just don't feel like anything really is being done about it. And we had one of the biggest, as you know, Will, right in my backyard here in Las Vegas. 61 people were. Guy legally was able to go into a store. He bought all these weapons. I don't know how you can stop somebody from doing something like that. I don't have all the answers. I just want a few things, to be changed. I want mandatory training. Doesn't matter what gun you buy. Give me 2 hours of training so you know how to hold a gun, you know how to shoot a gun, you know how to store a gun. We don't even have that. I mean, I know driving a car is a privilege, and I know owning a gun is a right. I get that. But when you get your driver's license, as you know, Will, you have to take a test, physical test. You have an instructor right next to you. You have to know how to operate the vehicle. You have to re-register your car, all that stuff. We don't have basically almost any of those benchmarks when it comes to guns, and I just have a problem with that.
I mean, I can understand that, and I know some states do still, even under a Heller and whatever, have like even if the permits are shall issue, they're allowed to place certain training requirements on you to do that. I don't have I don't really have an issue with that. I don't think that's that big a deal.
Sure.
I also just don't think that those changes in those laws would be that consequential, and especially in terms of the school shooting problems that you talk about, either in gun violence or school shootings. So
obviously mental illness.
I mean, the mental illness is a bigger issue. I think, we need to, you can look at one of the big policy mistakes of like 50 years ago was closing all the mental institutions.
Got to fund it, right?
Basically. Yeah. I mean, not just you have to fund it. It's a product of a social pushback against that as a result of like what flew over the cuckoo's nest. And like a social push thing that these things were oppressive, but now we just have them on the streets, and that doesn't seem to be an improvement.